So my name is Linda Strange, and I'm here with Georbina Da Rosa, my former student, who was also the inspiration for the protagonist in my short story, The Longest Day, which was recently published in Freshwater Literary Journal, the 2022 issue. And we're going to do a little interview together about the story that I wrote. But first of all, I want to give you a little synopsis of the story if you haven't already read it on my website, lindastrange.com. So the story details the experience of a young non-English speaking Cape Verdean girl who in the story is called G on her first day in an inner city American school. And it's an account of her first encounter with her new ESL teacher, which was me, and the safe space that this teacher creates for her to show her true emotions. Which of course leads me to my first question for a girl who is no longer a girl. She's now a young woman, 28 years old, so this is 20 years ago we're talking about now. And she just returned from her European vacation and spent her 28th birthday in Barcelona, so a lot of things have changed. So my first question for her, of course, is, did I really create a safe space for you, or was that my delusion?
No, you absolutely did. I remember being terrified and confused and not knowing what was happening, not knowing what anyone was saying, because I didn't understand the language yet. And you were the first person that I saw. And I remember when you left and I was in the classroom, I'm like, okay, there's all these students here. That didn't feel so safe, but I think when I was with you, I definitely felt safe. Being in your classroom felt really safe. It was very intimate and there wasn't as many students. You definitely created a safe space for me to feel like, okay, at least I have one person that's guiding me through this.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Because you never really know what's in people's heads, you know? You try to do your best for the kids, but you never always know. So the first question that I have for you is that in the story, I have your character cry in school, break down and cry, even though you never did cry that day in school. Not that I know of, anyway. You looked like you wanted to cry at the end of the day. You had that on the verge look about you. And I always imagined that you went home and broke down in your mother's arms or something like that, but did you? So my question is, did you? I've never actually asked you.
I did. At the end of the day, I felt very overwhelmed, but I held my tears together. I made it through the day without crying, but when I got home, I absolutely cried. I remember feeling so overwhelmed. I remember just thinking, like, how am I going to do this? And how am I going to speak with everyone? How am I going to learn the language? It was a lot of questions, and it was already a huge transition coming into a new country, then starting a new school. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know the language. It was a lot for little 8-year-old me, and little 8-year-old me definitely cried that day in my mom's arms, for sure.
You had that look around your eyes. It was a red look, but you were in control, but just barely. So I know you have questions for me as well.
I do. Okay, so you were able to not only experience the story in real life, but also reflected and wrote about it. How was the writing and publishing experience for you?
So the writing experience is completely different from the publishing experience. So we'll start with that. The writing experience, so when people write about something, it's because you feel compelled to write about something. So something touched you or something was important enough for you to sit down and try to communicate. It takes a long time. Things get rewritten a lot. I belong to a writers group where things get critiqued and we discuss it. But it was a positive experience to try and show what happened on that day. I spent a long time, then put it aside, came back to it, changed some things, and that's really great. Now the publishing experience, the publishing experience is completely different from the writing experience. The publishing experience is a lot of rejections. It is sending letters to journals and sending your story out there and getting either not hearing back at all, which can happen, or getting a lot of it's not a good fit for us at this time, da 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 da. Okay, so there's a lot of that, and you really have to have a thick skin. And then suddenly one day you're checking your emails for something else, and an email comes through, "We love your story, we're going to publish it," and you're like, "Oh my God!" All right, you can barely believe it. You've had so much rejection. So definitely publishing is not the same as writing. But no, the writing experience is a positive experience, totally.
Yeah, and you didn't give up, and you kept going, and you got published.
It's true. We always tell our kids at school, never give up, never give up. And sometimes I say, I write stories and I send them out and I get like 50 rejections, and they're like, 50? And I'm like, that's right, but you have to keep going. So my next question for you is, how does it feel to have a story written about your emotional state, about how you felt? Is there like a kind of an icky feeling? Does it feel a little prying? Do you feel like I violated your privacy in some way? Is it something you didn't necessarily want out there, how you felt on that day? Or do you feel that it's a positive experience to have that shared?
I remember reading the story, and it took me back to that exact day. And as I was reading your story, I was like, oh my God, this is how I felt. And someone knew how I felt. And I felt seen, I felt heard, and I felt like, okay, I wasn't being a crybaby. I was feeling the right normal emotions for what I was experiencing and the transition that I was going through. It didn't feel icky, because I do know that it was a hard transition, and I know you have many kids who come in from different countries who don't know the language, and I'm sure you've experienced where they probably have felt similar. And I want kids to know that it's okay to cry, maybe not in school, because that might, they will remember you forever for that, but it was a normal feeling. And when I was reading it, it normalized the fact that I was going through a big transition, and it was okay for me to feel the way that I was feeling. And the way you described it was definitely not icky. It brought me back to that very moment. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that. And I can't believe I know the language now, and I've transitioned so beautifully, from that moment, and went on to accomplishing so much. Thank you for your help with that. So it was definitely took me back, and it gave me a chance to really reflect and see how far I've come. And also it's comforting, I think, for other kids to read that and to feel like, okay, I wasn't the only one, and it was normal feeling the way I was feeling, because it was a lot of emotions that I couldn't even name at that age. Sure. That I was feeling. Yeah. So I think, you describing my emotional state was very positive, and I think it can be very helpful for other kids.
Good. I'm glad. So I think you have a question for me now.
I do have a question for you. So tell me, what led or inspired you to write about G, and why her story?
Okay, well, of course, G is you. And when I gave you the name G in the story, I totally didn't know that this was something other people called you, which kind of was totally bizarre when you told me that later, because I'd always only used your full name. So of course our relationship is something that, people ask me about it, and I'm like, it just happened. Like, I've had a lot of kids over the years, but something clicked between us, and you were the kid that I really wanted to help and wanted to get help out. And I didn't really have a grand plan. It was just step by step, little by little. So it has been an inspiration to me to watch you move through your life, go from school to school, from success to success, and there have been some non-successes too, right? We've had some tough times as well, but I wanted to put that out there. That's been one of the most important experiences of my life, of my adult life, and I wanted to write about that. I wanted to share that with other people. So yeah, I have a question about, have you ever thought that there's something that I or your classroom teacher or the school could have done differently on that day to make you feel more comfortable? Or do you feel that the situation of the first day of school in a new country and new language is just one of those tough life experiences that you can't make a whole lot better, that it's a hard thing?
Yeah. And I had to sit with this question, because I'm like, how could they have made it better, right? And I think the experience, yes, it was a tough one, but I think it just comes with transitioning into a new country, into a new school, and not knowing the language. I felt very supportive by you, by the teachers, by the students. I think the students were not as mean as I thought they would be.
Glad to hear it.
They were definitely like, okay, like she doesn't speak English, and I remember them talking to me and I couldn't understand. But they didn't try to like, make fun of me or do anything that made me feel a lot worse about the way I was already feeling. But I think it's just one of those experiences that no matter what you add, no matter what the teachers or the school tries to do, you're going to feel overwhelmed because it's just a lot happening. It's all very new. It's a lot to process at that age. And you did a lot of check-ins. I remember a lot of my teachers doing a lot of check-ins. I felt supported absolutely for the experience that I was going through. So I don't think there's anything that would have been done differently that would have
I think you were lucky in our school because we have a lot of kids come who don't speak English. So it was like not an unusual thing to have a new kid in class who didn't speak English. And some of the kids who you were sitting with in class had had that experience themselves the year before, 2 years before that. So it is a supportive environment in that sense. I could imagine you coming into a different kind of school where they didn't get a lot of people from other countries where you would maybe not have felt that support because people just, if you haven't had that experience, you really don't understand. You really don't. So I have to say that, people often say, oh, you work in an inner city school and the kids are tough, and sometimes they are, but they also often inspire me with how supportive they are of each other and how kind and how caring they are of each other. More so maybe than in a less tough environment.
Right. And I think also because the kids, a lot of them are bilingual or know different languages, I think they were like, okay, we understand. I mean, we were all 8 years old. They're like, I've seen this. Like, I know my parents don't speak the same language that I speak in school. So I think the fact that that was something that they were used to also made it seem like they were able to understand, like, this girl doesn't know how to say hi or anything. I think they were also amazed. Like, she doesn't know how to say anything.
She really doesn't know anything.
Right. So, kids being kids, I think it was okay. I mean, it was hard, but I think, given the fact that you all are used to kids coming in, I think Walsh School does the best that they can with welcoming kids who are transitioning from a different country. Okay. I think you have another. Oh,
no, it's your.
So it's your
turn.
It's your turn. So to follow up with, so feeling supportive. In your opinion, what has been the most helpful tool or resources for children who are immigrants transitioning to a new country and school system? Are the teachers and schools equipped to support these children?
So I think this dovetails with what we were just talking about. I definitely think they need ESL instruction. I am not in support of the sink or swim method, because if you have no one to help them, I guess that's how it is going to have to be, but it's not the best way. They definitely need someone, like you were saying, a safe place to go, somewhere that they can look forward to being able to make mistakes without having people hear their mistakes or whatever, just to have somewhere to go. But I actually think the most important thing is empathy. And we agreed that in Walsh, the empathy is there because you have a lot of other kids who know how you feel. I do think ESL teachers need to be trained. I think they need to be experienced, but I also feel the third element, the most important element, is they need to have had the experience that their children are having in front of them. Because it's a very humbling experience, as I'm sure you know, suddenly not being able to understand anything, having to manage with very little language, maybe act things out, whatever. And you're a different person if you've had that experience than the person who hasn't. So I think it's really important that people have had that experience and can just empathize. And I think the new kids feel that. They feel that you are with them, so to speak, even if it's just a pat on the shoulder or you're saying, okay, you know what, let's not try and learn any new language. You can color for a while, right? Because sometimes you just need that downtime. It's as you say, it's overwhelming and it's too much. So,
and I definitely felt that at Walsh from the teachers and the students. Like, I think empathy goes a long way, and I needed that. Even though I didn't understand the language, I knew I had people around me that were understanding sort of what I was going through. And then being in your classroom, I mean, I don't know how I would have done it without ESL, right? Or just the whole method of, not having that, like, that wouldn't have been possible. And I remember just being in your classroom, that was very reassuring, and you taking your time, and that one-on-one that I don't get in the classroom was very, very crucial to me being able to understand the language and being able to feel comfortable enough to even try to sound things out. So having that one-on-one time in your classroom, it being my safe space, you acting out and not just trying to just talk, but like doing all of the, like, the puppets, all of the strategies that you use.
Yeah.
But it does help, and it does make me feel, it did make me feel a lot more comfortable to be like, okay, let me try to sound this out, even if I feel like it's not gonna sound like what she's saying.
Right. The one thing I did learn from you that I didn't fully appreciate before is the difference between Portuguese and English, and how much more difficult it is to make the transition from Portuguese to English rather than Spanish to English. Because I remember sometimes where you would read words and I would be like, wow, I don't even know how she came up with that pronunciation. Whereas with a Spanish-speaking child, I could pretty much predict how they would read the English word and the mistakes they would make. So I understood, this is a really different language. There's a much bigger transition here, and it's going to take longer. And it did take longer. But it wasn't unsuccessful.
No.
And I can ask the next question, and then we can end with yours. Okay. Your last one. Do you think it's easier to immigrate when you enter the country speaking a language more people know? I'm asking this question thinking both in the short term and in the long term. Like, okay, obviously it's easier in the short term because more people can explain things to you, more people can translate for you. But maybe it's not necessarily the best thing in the long term because you don't feel as compelled to learn English when a lot of people can translate for you. And maybe you feel more compelled to assimilate when you belong to a language or speak a language that not that many other people speak. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think that would have definitely been a little bit more helpful. But I think experiencing what I experienced, and it was unique, and I learned a lot outside of just like learning the language, like being patient and trying to communicate in ways I would never communicate. I think that helped me out a lot. And I feel like, I don't know.
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Definitely some languages are much easier to go from one language to another. But I also think that, like in our town, in Waterbury, where the main language is Spanish, there are a lot of resources for Spanish speakers that are not there for other people. And so the other people are forced maybe to move a little quicker. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. In some ways, I think it is a good thing.
Right, and it could be a good thing, and the learning experience could be a lot more comfortable, a lot quicker. And I think, because sometimes, like, especially you, I know you know a lot of like words in Spanish and words in Portuguese. I think that can be very helpful with students when they're like struggling as well, when they can't think of it. But I know even the way I learned Spanish, it was just like, I was just thrown in there. It was like, figure it out. And that was the best way that I was able to learn Spanish instead of let's just use words in English, right?
Right.
So I think in the long run and in the short term, I think it's a lot better that way.
Interesting. Okay, so I think you have the last question for
I
me.
do have the last question. So tell me, what's next with G Story? Do you wish to add more to this story? A book? Tell us what's next for you.
So the story that was published about your first day was actually a shortened version of a longer piece, which was called Drowning. And it was a metaphor for drowning in a new language, which is in that short piece. But I've actually written 4 stories now about you at different stages in your elementary school. You're still in elementary school. And my goal is to write several more stories following you as you grow up through at different levels of school and then maybe even beyond. And my long-range goal is to have enough short stories to have a book of short stories just on the theme of G and the immigration. And it's a story of an immigration and how it starts and where it goes. So that's my plan. I'm trying to get some of the other stories that are already completed published in journals. And we already talked about what the publishing experience is like. It's a lot of no's, and then one day you just like get a random email and somebody says, oh, you know, we really loved his story, we're going to publish it. And you're like, wow,
like, oh my
you
God.
know, how did that happen? So hopefully that's going to work out.
That's exciting, and it's you know, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to G's story and find some comfort, or even be able to, like I did, imagine themselves when they were a kid going through that as well.
Absolutely, I hope so. So I just want to say, if you haven't read the story that we are talking about, you can go to my website, www.lindastrange.com, and on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a bar where there should be a link to The Longest Day. If you're looking on your phone, you just need to scroll down to the bottom of the screen and the link is there. We're also going to put up this link of this interview in case you want to watch it again and again. That should be in the same place. And definitely leave a comment depending on where you're reading this, Facebook, LinkedIn, from an email share, or on my website. Any comments or questions are very much appreciated, and who knows, we might have enough to do another recording answering other people's questions. So I just want to thank you for coming here today.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure.